Hello and welcome to How Football Works, a new talkSPORT show breaking down the ins and outs of the business side of the beautiful game. I'm Olly Clink, thanks for your company. Joining me today is football finance expert Kieran Maguire and the Managing Director and Chairman of Charlton Athletic, Jim Rodwell. Welcome to you both. Kieran, have you come down off the ceiling yet after Brighton's win over Manchester United at the weekend?
Not quite. You can't. A last-minute winner is always fantastic, but to beat a side as prestigious as Manchester United is doubly exciting. But yeah, I'll try and keep calm throughout the rest of our talk together, though.
Looking forward to that. And Jim, for you, 3 wins from 3 in the league for Charlton. Very good start to the season.
It's gone very well. Yeah, we take nothing for granted, but it's been a good start. No goals conceded, and yeah, we seem to be moving in the right direction, certainly.
I'm sure the fans are very happy with that as well. Gentlemen, if we start with one of the biggest stories of the summer, and that's been the business of Chelsea, a club that can't seem to find themselves out of the headlines at the moment, despite a big win at the weekend as well. But Kieran, just firstly, if you could break down for us how Clearlake and Todd Boehly are running the business side of the football club.
I think it's organised chaos from Clearlake, in the sense that they've tried to adopt some form of a money ball model. They've targeted younger players. They've been willing to pay high fees. The noises we're getting out of the club is that the players coming in are on relatively low wages, although I'm a little bit sceptical with regards to that. And I guess the big question is how this has all been funded. Yeah, they've spent in excess of £1.2 billion since Clearlake acquired the club. The payments appear to have been split through, first of all, spreading the cost in the accounts over a long period of time, which no other clubs have done before, through giving the players long-term contracts. Secondly, I don't think Chelsea get enough credit for this. They're very good at shifting players out of the club at large fees and large profits, especially when it comes to academy players. So if you take a look at Mason Mount, Conor Gallagher, Mark Guehi, Tammy Abrahams, and so on, they've all gone for good fees, and those are pure profit. And the other thing, and I think this is sort of an unexpected benefit of acquiring the club effectively from the government, that they just acquired the assets of Chelsea to a large extent. There were no mortgages on real estate assets, and that's allowed them to sell hotels, car parks, and potentially the women's team as well to other parts of the Clearlake empire. And that's booked a profit, which has contributed to the ability to buy players in.
And Todd Boehly before has worked in Major League Baseball as well. And would it be fair to say, Kieran, that he's tried to follow that kind of model? Would you be able to break that down as well?
Yes, I mean, the model which that they have done is to sign players on very long contracts. I think what is different between MLB and football is that as far as some of the MLB signs are concerned, and they do have cost control rules there, that the players are being paid after the contract expires, which is intriguing. It's good for cash flow. It's good for, I guess, the player from a taxation point of view as well. It's part of their long-term planning. So I don't think that's been applied in the Premier League, but certainly the adoption of a data analytical approach, and they've recruited from Brighton, and I think the Brighton model is very much based on data analytics as well. So that appears to be the strategy. Whereas I think under Roman Abramovich, the players being recruited, the coach tended to have a greater input and emphasis, and the commitment to data and the commitment to analytics was less significant.
Jim, as a managing director yourself, what have you made of the way Chelsea have conducted their business? Because, as Kieran mentioned, it's not something we've seen in football before.
Well, I look at it with a little bit of envy. Spending that kind of money with absolute gay abandon must be interesting in itself. I think I look at Chelsea slightly differently. Kieran says chaos, and I guess there is an element of that. I do think they've got a plan. Whether that's the right plan or the wrong plan, only time will tell ultimately. I do think they've got a plan to drive down their cost base eventually and become compliant with things like PSR. Kieran's quite right. You know, they end up selling the car park and the women's team, but you can only do that once. When you've sold it, you've sold it. So that might be a quick fix for the time being, but I don't think that's a long-term strategy by any sense of the word. So I think, I was looking at this last night actually in anticipation, and it is, what they've done in MLB is really interesting. I think in the beginning, I don't think that the Todd Boehly Clear Lake regime was seen as a great success, but they've gone on to be very successful subsequently. And let's, not forget, these are smart people. They've made a lot of money. They've been incredibly successful in business, and they're doing different things. I sound like an apologist for Chelsea. I don't know these people. I've never met these people, but I think it's quite interesting what they're doing. And people seem to thrive on clubs spending money, and that's what they're doing, and they get slightly chastised for it. I'm the same as Kieran. Some of the figures that I'm seeing bandished about in terms of wages for the incoming players, I am also slightly sceptical about this. I read a figure with Jonathan Northcroft yesterday, was talking about an average figure of £60,000 a week. I would be surprised if their average wage was anywhere like £60,000 a week. They are still signing some very elite, very expensive players, predominantly from Kieran's football club. So I think there is a plan. I think it's different. Whether it's the right or the wrong one, we shall wait and see. But I suppose you have to give them the benefit of the doubt for a period of time.
As you say, these plans have worked eventually for them in baseball, but do you think there'll be some fans looking at this going, well, hang on, these are two totally different sports, and the kind of methods you used in baseball might not work in football, and that's a big risk?
There's every chance. I think what they're doing is a huge risk. It's they managed to acquire the football club under slightly unique circumstances, but there is definitely risk associated to what they're going to do. The obvious difference between the MLB and the Premier League is clearly promotion. Well, it's clearly relegation. I'm not suggesting Chelsea are going to get relegated, but I also don't think that their model will last for too long if they don't qualify for Europe on a regular basis. I mean, that's the holy grail. Certainly, you look at the Europa League, Chelsea have got to start competing to get into the top four to make those revenues stack up, because if the revenues don't stack up and you've sold all your asset, they are going to have huge issue with profit and sustainability regulations.
Kieran, you've talked about this sale of car parks and hotels and the women's team. Would you be able to break down for us what Chelsea have done there and how they've gone about it?
Well, under the present PSR rules, you are allowed to sell real estate assets to anybody, and that includes other parts of a group, and that's what we've seen with regards to Chelsea. If we take a look at their 2023 accounts, there were property asset sales which brought in around about £76 million worth of profit. That allows the club to spend significantly more than that because of the way that contracts are organised for accounting purposes. If you sign a £100 million player on a 5-year contract, that works out as an annual cost, and we call that amortisation of £20 million a year. What Chelsea have done, and they've certainly got first mover advantage on this, is that they've signed those similar players on 8-year contracts. So 100 divided by 8 allows a PSR cost of £12.5 million a year. So by selling the property for the profit of £76 million, it allows you to sign 5 players, 5 or 6 players on £100 million a year deals, and still from an accounting point of view, you're fairly neutral. So that's where Chelsea have been ahead of the market. There was a reaction from other chief executives of Premier League clubs and also from UEFA, and I must say, I think that's been harsh. I think Chelsea have done absolutely nothing wrong here, as we've been saying. They've taken on a huge risk, and we wait to see over the course of the next 4 to 5 years whether that risk bears fruit or not. But I don't think that they've done anything wrong at all. And just because something's different doesn't mean it should be discouraged. It does give the players a degree of certainty with regards to their future earnings and their future careers. And there's a case for saying that should be applauded. But a combination of the way that you book profits for both players and for real estate assets has allowed Chelsea to effectively, for every £1 that's come in, that's allowed them to spend 6 or 7 on the market.
And I think that's interesting as well in terms of the contract lengths. Again, I think it's not a bad idea at all. If you're signing a player for £50 million, you've got to make the assumption that you believe that this player is the finished article, that this is a player that's going to contribute to you in the long term. Why not sign them for 8 years? You know, when a player signs a 5-year contract, 8-year contract, the club tends to be in control of the situation. As it gets towards the end of that contract, you know, post-Bosman, that's when the player takes control of that situation. So what it does give you, as well as all the accounting techniques that Kieran's just spoken about, it just gives you certainty and it gives you control over that player's future as well.
Does it not leave you in some sticky situations? For instance, at the moment, we're seeing with Raheem Sterling potentially that he's going to be leaving the club and he's still got 3 years left on his contract.
It could do. You know, you could have a player with 6 years left on his contract who, God forbid, gets a career-ending injury. Now, there are mechanisms to cope with things like that, but undoubtedly, it's like football. Football is like life. You never get everything right and you rarely get everything wrong. But for me, I actually think if I'm Chelsea, 8-year contracts are not a bad idea at all. And again, I think it's something that's far more commonplace in the MLB, isn't it, in American sports?
Do you think, potentially, though, if you're handing out contracts of that length that are very lucrative as well, would you be certain that you are attracting the right kind of player? Because surely you'd have their agent and you'd have certain players who are thinking, wow, that is such a brilliant contract and what I'm going to be able to be receiving from this. They'll be attracted to that rather than potentially playing for
Well, again, I go back to my previous point. If you're spending £50 million on a player, you should be doing plenty of due diligence into that player, which includes checks on their characters as best as you can. So if you're spending £50 million, you are signing an elite footballer. And elite footballers should come with elite mindsets. So that actually shouldn't be the issue. You should be able to look at it from the other flip side. I've signed an 8-year contract. I've got more money than God. Park that in the drawer. All I've got to do is concentrate on playing football to the best of my abilities. I don't have to worry about agents. I don't have to worry about anything else. All I have to concern myself with is keeping my performance levels high. And I'm sure these 8-year contracts are quite, you know, well constructed in terms of bonuses and performances, and if the player plays 50 times for his country, whatever that might look like. So I don't think it will be as simple as some player just sitting on their hands. I don't think players ordinarily do things like that anyway. I don't think that's the norm. But again, if you're spending £50 million, you have every reason to believe that this person is elite, both in their performance and in their mindset.
Would it be something that you'd look to bring in to your policy at Charlton, especially if down the line you realise that it's something that has worked at a club like Chelsea, if it pays off?
I suspect there are things that, you know, it feels to me, and Kieran touched on this, that Chelsea are first to market in a lot of the stuff that they're actually doing at the moment. And now a lot of other people look at it and go, oh, crikey, we didn't like that, we better change the rules. It's a little bit like, you know, the way that tax works, isn't it? You know, you get expensive lawyers finding tax loopholes and then HMRC chases behind them to close the loopholes. It feels a little bit like that to me. It's like Kieran said, they have done nothing wrong. They've been early adopters of the existing regulations. And I very much doubt that anybody was involved at Chelsea who voted when those regulations were put in. They've just joined a private members club and said, yeah, we'll play by the rules and these are the rules. Now, I think some of those loopholes will get closed. I think that will likely happen. Would we start to do things like that at Charlton? Yeah, well, why not? We try to get our young players on 4-year contracts, 5-year contracts. It's funny, you see, because people come into Charlton and, you know, clearly I think we're an excellent football club. But Charlton isn't always, if you're a young player at the moment, Charlton is a League One football club. So ultimately, a League One football club should never be any young player's destination. That's the next step on the journey. Now, clearly, we hope we sign young players and they take us to the Premier League one day. That would be wonderful. But ultimately, that's a step on the journey. You could argue that Chelsea is the destination. So I get to my destination. I'm here for 8 years. I'm going to focus myself on winning the Premiership, winning Champions Leagues, the things that Chelsea have done previously. So again, I don't think it's unusual. It clearly works from an accounting point of view, but even from a football point of view, it comes with risk. But I don't think it's the craziest thing I've ever heard of in football by any stretch.
Kieran, Jim said there about the loopholes potentially being closed. Is there any sense already that this is going to happen or has already happened in terms of some of those loopholes?
Well, certainly the loophole with regards to player contracts has been dealt with by both UEFA and the Premier League. So now, regardless of the length of the contract, you write off the cost of the transfer over a maximum of 5 years. There was an attempt by the Premier League to change the ability of clubs to sell assets effectively to itself But that was rejected. They didn't get the requisite numbers, and under the constitution of the Premier League, you need a 2/3 majority. So we now have got inconsistencies. We've seen in the EFL. They changed their rules sort of, I think it was 3 years ago, and that was after Derby, Sheffield Wednesday, Birmingham City, Stoke City had all sold the stadiums to the owner in order to comply with the PSR rules. The UEFA rules, again, are different to those of the Premier League. So that could make things slightly more complicated for Chelsea because the club is participating in European competition this year. But unless there's been a major change in the way that things are worded, there doesn't appear to be an appetite to change this particular issue as far as the Premier League is concerned. And I suspect that's due to some club owners saying, well, hold on, if Chelsea have just got a £70 million advantage in 2023 and potentially a higher one in 2024, why shouldn't we also effectively play out our get out of jail free card with regards to PSR going forwards?
So that's a really important nuance. Sale and lease back in business isn't unusual in most businesses. Lots of businesses do that. That's the point. It's selling it to connected groups within your company for a purpose. I don't think anybody's talking about if Chelsea wanted to sell, their car park to a land developer that wasn't associated to Clearlake. Though I'm not sure there are any companies that aren't associated to Clearlake. But if they wanted to do that, that's fine. That's a normal course of business. It's selling it to basically circumnavigate the regulations. That's the issue. And Kieran's quite right. That was outlawed in the EFL a couple of years ago, post things like Derby County, possibly Bury, those types of circumstances. So that's the really important point, selling it to interconnected companies.
Kieran, just quickly on the hotel sale, I believe it led to a bit of a run-in for you and Chelsea to do with an article you wrote. Can you tell us a bit about that?
That's right. I was asked by a well-known satellite broadcaster in this country to write a summary of 6 clubs' finances just before the 30th of June, because the 30th of June has now effectively become the second transfer window as far as the accounts are concerned in terms of compliance with PSR. And the 6 clubs I was asked to look at was Nottingham Forest, Leicester, Aston Villa, Newcastle, Everton and Chelsea. So I wrote this piece and it was all approved and it went up on the website of the broadcaster. And then Chelsea kicked off about it, and my comments were very, very mild. I try to be as objective and analytical as I can, and that makes me a very boring person. But I just said that this is what they've done. They've been very good at player sales, but they probably still had to do something before the end of June. And by all accounts, Chelsea were very unhappy with that, and they encouraged the broadcaster to take down the article, which they subsequently did.
Wow, there we go. Not a boring person at all, Kieran. You're having it out with Chelsea there.